Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast, dear listeners. Today I'm recording a solo Q&A episode. I have quite a few questions to get through, so thank you to everyone who submitted them, which means I may or may not have to split this into two. If it turns out to be a 3-hour episode, I will definitely split that into parts, but we'll only find out as we go on. The first question I have is, how do you deal with cravings? So first off, I want to say that cravings aren't necessarily a bad thing. I believe that cravings are often demonized, like they are a terrible thing to experience that must be avoided at all costs. You should never indulge a craving. Now, you can actually decide to satisfy a certain craving, even if you are in a fat loss phase, and that would mean increasing or eating something that's relatively high in calories, because you can always reduce your calories elsewhere, either on the same day or on following days, in order to make sure that over time you're still in a calorie deficit. So if you think that by satisfying that craving, you are going to be able to stop thinking about that food and focusing on it so much, and then you can make up for it and you're going to get on with your diet effectively and successfully, then potentially deciding to eat that food is the best decision for you at that moment in time. For other people, doing the same thing could actually be detrimental, because then it only makes them want that kind of food more and more, and they can't stop themselves. So first you need to decide whether you are in a position where satisfying the craving might actually be helpful to you. Now, if you decide that you don't want to act on that craving, these are ways in which you can deal with them. First of all, I suggest that you create a pause between the craving and the act of eating. Because our typical response to a craving is, I get a craving, I eat the food immediately. Now you want to break this cycle and distance yourself from the act of eating for long enough that you can decide whether you want to eat or not. Because by having a craving to eating loop, we don't take enough time to make a conscious decision. We're just going with the flow, with our instinct. So when you create this pause, it can be as simple as asking yourself, why do I want this food right now? You're drawing attention to the fact that you have a craving, or rather that you feel that you want food. So then you can ask yourself, am I actually hungry, or am I craving something? And you can decide what you want to do about that, depending on the answer. If you never actually find that just having the thought or using the question, maybe the question doesn't come to you, or even if it comes to you in the moment, you still act on the instinct to indulge the craving, even if you don't want to, then you can use a slightly more, let's call it drastic version of the pause, which is the stop technique, whereby you actually say to yourself, stop, out loud. And I say drastic because it's gonna make you feel a little bit awkward to actually shout at yourself, or at least use an exclamation in a loud voice, but it is going to stop you. It is going to make you pause. So it is effective. And if you do feel a little bit awkward, normally I find that once you've done it a couple of times, you learn to introduce that pause and you stop using the stop technique because you don't need it anymore. Now, once you've created the pause, it's important to understand how cravings work. And they usually work in waves, similar to how hunger works. Normally, you're gonna get a craving and it's going to increase in intensity. And if you don't do anything about it, it's going to reach a peak intensity and then it's going to go away. Hunger is similar. You're going to experience a little bit of hunger and then it grows, it grows, it grows, it peaks in intensity. But if you don't eat anything, it goes away and hunger typically comes back later on. In general, it will take maybe 20 minutes for this craving wave to occur. So if you can ride that wave until the peak is over, you find that you've successfully overcome the craving and you actually don't feel like you want that food as much anymore. Now, to ride the wave, you want to keep yourself busy with some engaging activity. For example, physical exercise like a workout or a walk, or work, or playing video games, or having a conversation, whether in person or on the phone. It's very important that you are engaged mentally and that you're not doing something mindless like watching TV, because otherwise you're not going to escape that craving, and especially at its peak. So hopefully this gives you some ideas on how you can personally deal with your own cravings. The next question is, how important is it to hit fiber and protein targets on a daily basis as opposed to a weekly basis? Now, that's an interesting question. With regards to fiber, I would say that your weekly average ultimately is the most important variable for progress. But you also don't want huge variations in fiber on a day-to-day basis for two reasons. Number one, huge variations in your fiber can impact your digestion. For example, if your fiber is excessively low, you can get constipated. If it's excessively high, you can get either constipated or you can get diarrhea. Neither is pleasant. 0 out of 10 recommend. The second reason is that your body takes time to adapt to a certain amount of fiber, especially when you're increasing it, which is the reason why you want to give your body an opportunity to adapt. And if you always change how much fiber you're eating by a substantial amount every day, your body is not going to be able to do that. And as a result, if it's not adapted, whenever it gets really low or really high, you're going to experience those digestive issues that I've just mentioned. So as a practical example of extreme variations in fiber, if you had 40 grams of fiber one day and 10 grams the next day, the average is still 25 grams over the 2 days. So if that's your goal, you could say, well, I've achieved my goal. But it's going to have a different effect on your body than if you just had 24 to 26 grams on both days. And that's what I would recommend, aiming for a more consistent amount every single day while looking at your weekly average as your target. With regards to protein is important on a daily basis because protein turnover is constantly happening in the body. And protein turnover is the process of breaking protein down and creating new protein. So for the purpose of muscle growth, we want to spend the majority of the time in what's called a net positive protein balance, whereby protein synthesis is higher than protein breakdown. We don't want all the time spent synthesizing new protein and never breaking it down. Protein breakdown is actually important, but over time the net balance should be positive, where synthesis is more often higher than breakdown. And that's why it's important to do your best to hit your total daily protein target every single day. Having said that, you may not be at a fitness level or skill level with your nutritional habits whereby it's easy for you to hit that daily target every single day. A lot of my starting clients, if they've never actually managed their nutrition effectively, need to work up to this, which is why if somebody is completely new, I normally start by focusing on their weekly protein average as a target. So rather than thinking about eating the same amount of protein every day, we're thinking about eating at least an average amount of protein every week. So if the goal is 120 grams of protein, I want to see that goal accomplished as an average across 7 days, as opposed to every single day. And then once this becomes second nature, that's when you can upgrade to focusing on your daily protein target. You want to take it one step at a time and go at your own pace based on where you're at. So when I say that protein is important on a daily basis, it doesn't mean that if you're not doing that yet, you're making zero gains. Take this as an aspirational target, as opposed to either you're already doing this or you're not going to make progress. Question number 3 is about training. How do you deal with an exercise that you really hate doing? The first question I would ask is, why do you hate it? For example, if the exercise hurts and you've already tried different ways to execute it in an attempt to reduce or remove the pain, and none of these alternatives have worked and you've run out of options, chuck it in the bin. I do not recommend exercising through pain because, one, potentially that's going to increase your injury risk, but number two, as it pertains to muscle growth or hypertrophy, if you're overtly focused on the pain, you're not focusing on taking the target muscle close enough to failure to get the hypertrophic stimulus that you want. So for both of these reasons, I really wouldn't want you to train through pain just because you think that that exercise is necessary. No exercise is necessary for the purpose of hypertrophy. We have a lot of alternatives that we can choose from because the goal isn't to do a certain exercise, it's to take the target muscle close enough to failure to receive the stimulus that it needs to grow. Another scenario could be what I call the good kind of hate, whereby the exercise is really hard and that's why you hate it. It's a mental issue rather than a physical issue. For example, this is very common with split squat and lunge variations. Most people do not like them. I personally will probably never enjoy split squats the same way that I enjoy, I don't know, a barbell bench press, but I can recognize that they are very, very effective. So to an extent, you're going to suck it up because you don't have to like every aspect of your program for it to be effective. Now, saying that, I've also found that if you expose yourself to the same exercise over and over again, you get better at it. And you also train your brain to handle the psychological discomfort better. Getting better at it makes you feel better about the exercise because at first I find that a lot of clients tell me I really don't like this simply because they've never done it before. But as they gain more proficiency, they start telling me I don't hate it as much anymore because at least I don't suck at it as much as I used to. And secondarily, exposure therapy works. So you might never actually say, I love a split squat, but I have actually found in my own experience that years ago, anytime I had to do a split squat, I was like, this sucks, I hate it, I just want to get it done. Now, I've actually, I was doing split squats consistently for 3 to 6 months, I believe. I had to stop them due to an issue with my adductor, whereby any kind of variation of a unilateral squat was bothering me. But anyway, prior to that, I had been doing them for 3 to 6 months, and I got into the point where I was like, I'm good enough at these, and I've done them so many times that they're really not that big of a deal anymore. Now, in this particular scenario, with a good kind of hate type exercise, you may have a lower tolerance to them than you have other exercises, so you could also choose to switch them up more often than you would others. So if normally you keep a leg press for 6 months or a year into your program, if you're doing a split squat, you might find that you hit a wall with them in terms of your ability to cope with them mentally a little bit sooner. So maybe you do them for 3 months and then you change to a different exercise. This way you still use them, you still get the benefits from them, but when you hit your, let's call it training fatigue level, your exercise fatigue, threshold with them, you change them. The final scenario would be if you dislike an exercise so much that you're not even trying to engage with it in an effective way, you just want to get it done. And again, you don't focus so much on stimulating the muscle, you just focus on, if I get to the top of my rep range or to however many reps I've planned on doing, I'm going to stop. And so you don't even really think that much about whether you're close enough to failure. Or worse, you get to the point where you're altogether skipping the exercise, or you're skipping the whole workout that it's in. At that point, you've definitely gone above and beyond your exercise tolerance threshold. So just change it, because it's no longer doing the work, and if anything, it's taking away from your ability to do the work that you need to do to grow the muscle that you want to grow. The next question is another one on training. What's the difference between training for strength and training for hypertrophy? Now, that's a really interesting question, because from a programming standpoint, programming for strength is not the same as programming for hypertrophy if your goal is what's called specific strength. Whereas, in my view, if you want to build general strength for daily life activities and you want to build muscle, your training is going to be virtually the same. So what's the difference between general strength and specific strength? As the name implies, as the term implies, specific strength is specific to something. In this particular case, we're talking about strength that's specific to the load that you're lifting and the exercise that you are doing. So if you're training for specific strength, you have to do the very specific exercise that you want to get stronger at, and you need to lift the load that you want to get stronger at. If you want a stronger 1 repetition maximum, which is the maximum amount of weight that you can lift for 1 repetition on the bench press, squat, and deadlift, which are the 3 lifts involved in powerlifting, you're gonna have to do those 3 lifts at least some of the time in your training. Definitely in the you're gonna have to do 1 rep sets, but also you're going to implement other rep ranges that are still quite low. So you might do a number of sets of 1, but also you'll be training 2 to 3 reps, you'll be training 4 to 5. They're going to be really, really heavy loads, which is why you're doing such few reps. And they're going to have to be done with that specific exercise. On the other hand, if you want to build muscle and if you want to build general strength for daily life activities, you can do any exercise that's going to stimulate the target muscle, because you're not trying to specifically get a stronger squat for 1 repetition. You just want to be able to get off the toilet when you're 80 without needing assistance. And for that, all you need is to have strong glutes and strong quads. So if you find exercises that are similar to that squatting motion, leg press, barbell squats, goblet squats, dumbbell front squats, barbell front squats, you name it, and you can take those muscle groups close enough to failure, then you are going to build both muscle, so you're going to stimulate hypertrophy, and you're also going to build better general strength. In summary, your training program, if you want to develop specific strength, for example, if you're a power lifter, is going to look very different from a training program for somebody who wants to build muscle, like a bodybuilder. But if you are a non-competitive athlete, if you're just somebody who exercises because they want to sculpt their physique, get a little bit healthier, build strength to live a healthy life and a healthy and long life, then you can train. Your program is essentially going to look the same. You are going to follow a hypertrophy specific program to build muscle, and while building muscle, you are going to get stronger and you are going to develop general strength. The next one is another question on training. Which is better, machines or free weights? The short answer is neither. And I'm going to specifically refer to a systematic review and meta-analysis by Haugen and colleagues. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I might not. It could be Huygen, but there is no umlaut or diaresis, so I'm not sure. If I am mispronouncing this and the author is listening, I apologize. This meta-analysis and systematic review was published in 2023, and they were examining 13 studies on maximal strength, jump height, and hypertrophy. And the title of the paper was Effect of Free Weight versus Machine-Based Strength Training on Maximal Strength, Hypertrophy, and Jump Performance. So they were trying to figure out the exact answer to the question that this person has asked me, which is, if I'm using dumbbells and barbells, is that better than using machines? And what the authors found, and I'm going to quote verbatim from their study, they stated, no differences were detected in the direct comparison of strength, jump performance, and muscle hypertrophy, which is really good news because it means that it seems like any type of gym equipment or even body weights that you have access to is going to build muscle if you are able to take the target muscle close enough to failure, and if you can perform the amount of volume that you individually need in order to make that muscle grow. Now, from an individual standpoint, why would you choose free weights over machines? There are a number of factors that I would suggest you consider. The first one is what's called the stimulus to fatigue ratio. And this is a concept that creates a relationship between the stimulus that any exercise generates, the hypertrophic stimulus in this case, the stimulus to grow, and the fatigue that this exercise generates. And you want to find the best compromise between the two, whereby you're getting enough stimulus without so much fatigue that you cannot recover from it. For instance, you may find that a barbell back squat creates a ton of stimulus for you, for your target muscles, but also a ton of fatigue. And maybe that amount of fatigue just isn't worth it to you. Whereas if you were to switch to a leg press, you're still getting a ton of stimulus, but now the fatigue is a lot lower. So in that case, the leg press might be a better compromise at this moment in time. Another factor is obviously availability. If you only have access to barbells and dumbbells, like if you train at home, of course, you're going to have to prioritize or only use barbells and dumbbells, knowing, based on what I've just said, on the findings from the systematic review and meta-analysis I cited, that both free weights and machine-based exercises are definitely viable to build muscle. The third consideration to make is your own personal preference. If using a lot of machines or using a lot of free weights simply isn't enjoyable for you, then you don't have to, because ultimately consistency trumps everything else. So choose something that you're going to stick with. For instance, I have a couple of clients who love calisthenics, and they've literally straight up told me, please don't give me too many machine or free weight exercises because I want to do body weight exercises for the most part. And guess what? They get 80% body weight exercises with just a few machine and free weight exercises to round up their program. Not round up, round out their program. Now, the next consideration is your own comfort, especially in terms of joint safety and health. If a particular exercise hurts you, but switching to a different implement doesn't hurt, go with what doesn't hurt. The next factor to consider is your own experience level. In general, machines are more user-friendly. All you need to do is sit in them, The majority of them also have a sticker showing you how to perform the exercise. So if you're very new to the gym, start with the machines and move to free weights over time. Finally, your own goal is also obviously a factor to consider. Circling back to the question about the differences between strength and hypertrophy, let's say that you want to build muscle, but you also have a secondary goal of getting stronger at a specific exercise. Maybe you want to build your first pull-up. Then at that point, you are going to have to do pull-ups and therefore rely on maybe the machine if you have access to a gym with a machine where you can perform assisted pull-ups, but also a lot of body weight work to build up to the ability to do pull-ups. In short, according to the evidence we have available, it looks like machines, free weights, and body weight as well can all produce a similar hypertrophic stimulus, but then you want to consider some specific factors when it comes to choosing the specific implement that works best for you at that moment in time. And this brings me to the final question for today, which is, can two people who weigh the same, have the same height, and the same body composition, so the same amount of muscle and fat, burn a different amount of calories? Yes, the answer is yes. Because while your weight, your height, and the amount of muscle and fat that you carry certainly have an impact on your caloric expenditure, those aren't the only components of caloric expenditure. And I'm going to go through what these components actually are in no specific order. The first component is what's referred to as basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, so BMR or RMR. Now, technically, BMR and RMR are slightly different concepts because in research they're measured differently. But in practice, especially in outside of the research community, people use these two interchangeably. However, I am going to give you the specific definitions. So BMR so your basal metabolic rate is the minimum amount of calories that you need to perform necessary functions. So functions that are necessary for life, like pumping blood throughout your body, digesting food, breathing, keeping a stable core temperature, growing your hair and your skin, and maintaining different levels of chemicals within the body. Whereas your RMR is your resting metabolic rate. So it's the same as the BMR, the amount of energy your body needs to function while resting, but it also, so the minimum amount of energy necessary to perform functions that are necessary for survival, but it also includes very low effort daily activity, which is why it's called resting, because it's technically how much energy do you need at rest / when performing very light effort, low effort activities. And these are eating, walking for short periods, going to the toilet, drinking caffeine, sweating and shivering. But for all intents and purposes, we're talking about the minimum amount of energy that you need to stay alive. And that will be your BMR or RMR if you include low effort activities. And this makes the greatest contribution to your caloric expenditure. If we're talking about BMR, that's around 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. Another component is your thermic effect of food, or TEF. The thermic effect of food is the amount of energy we expend to digest and absorb food, break it down into macronutrients and then micronutrients, and absorb it within the body and utilize it. And that's typically 10% of your total daily caloric expenditure. The next component is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. These are all activities that you don't have any control over. So we're talking about shivering, sweating, blinking, fidgeting, if you're the kind of person who fidgets. All of these movements that we don't really control, they happen automatically. That's your NEAT. Now, interestingly, NEAT can be extremely variable between people. So if two people have the same height, weight, and same body composition, one of them could burn as many as 1,000 extra calories just from NEAT because they fidget all the time. They're restless. They're always moving in some way. And the other person just sits still the entire time. It can be that extreme, as shown in some research. So certainly that can make a big contribution to the difference in your caloric expenditure. And the final component is exercise, which is formal exercise. So lifting weights, running, playing sports, anything that you do on purpose, even walking. If you walk on purpose rather than just letting the steps happen, if you have a specific step goal that you want to achieve, technically that's not NEAT because it's not something that you don't have control over. It's something that you're planning on doing. So all of these activities comprise the exercise component of caloric expenditure, which sadly is also the smallest component, as it seems to contribute about 5% of our total daily energy expenditure. Now, if you look at different research papers, while I've mentioned 4 components, sometimes researchers take 3 into account instead. So they put together exercise and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So they have BMR or RMR, and then the thermic effect of food or feeding, and exercise plus non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Sometimes they are even more granular and they divide energy expenditure into more components, but overall we're talking about very similar concepts. So in short, 2 people can weigh the same, have the same height, the same body composition, but they can still do different amounts of physical activity. And yes, it may contribute it may make the smallest contribution to caloric expenditure, but exercise is still going to burn calories. So if you are doing 6 lifting sessions per week and your identical twin with same height, same weight, same body comp is only doing 2, you're going to burn more calories. But also, these 2 people can burn fewer or more calories via non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and they might actually burn fewer or more calories via the thermic effect of feeding, because we don't all burn the exact same amount of calories when we are digesting and absorbing food. And that takes me to the end of this Q&A episode, which in the end I was actually pretty efficient with, so I am going to record it all and publish it in one go. Thank you very much for tuning in. As per usual, you'll find all the links to connect with me in the show notes. If you want to sign up for coaching, I'm currently taking on new online clients. So I've also recently updated my website. Now you can find much better descriptions of the services that I offer. And also I've decided to make all of my rates public. So you're going to be able to see what the cost involved is. And of course, on every single page, you're going to find my application form to apply so that I can schedule you in for a complimentary consultation of about half an hour, assuming that your application passes my initial screening. So thank you very much for tuning in, as always, dear listeners, and until next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.